Hi, this is Paul, and this is Rough Draft for Sunday, where I walk through the current version of my Sunday sermon. Now, in all fairness, I got the Utilitrad's word through Bethel McGrew, who got it from P.F. Smith or something like that, a blog, and the blog she linked to was really excellent. So just a little footnote beforehand, lest anyone think that this pastor is plagiarizing. No. Utilitrads and the surprising rebirth of the Christian curious. And in some ways, Jordan Peterson was one of the early ones and one of the bigger ones that sort of got this thing going. Justin Brierley has written a book on it and started a successful new podcast. And over the last 6 years, I've been watching this wave roll in, or maybe the tide roll back in, as Justin talks about at the beginning of the book, in terms of interest in Christianity. And maybe of the people who are atheists and New Agers, does that sentence make any sense? Are increasingly attracted to Christianity because for them it seems to work. And this is sort of where the Utilitrads, these people weren't traditionalists before, but it works, so utilitarian, traditionalist, Utilitrads. This is a cool turn of phrase. Louise Perry, you might put in that camp. A few years ago, she wrote a book entitled The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, where she basically took a look at the sexual revolution and took a look at feminism. She was very active in those communities, very steeped in it, but she, in working in rape crisis centers, basically came to the question of, is this really helping women? And so that started her on a path. And of course, she's a writer and now has a podcast and a Substack and all those kinds of things. And she's been moving towards Christianity. And she's very open and honest about that. But still sometimes expressing that she's not sure about sort of the supernatural stuff. Because, she was raised... there's an atheist and a non-believer and a secularist, and so Jesus walking on water or Jesus rising from the dead or the virgin birth. I don't know about that, but the Christianity stuff in terms of the kind of the rules and the civilization and all that, it seems to work. It seems to work better. Now, she had a conversation with Ross Douthat, who's a Roman Catholic, and he's opinion writer in the New York Times. And she said she was persuaded in her first book that Christian morality is true in a sense that it produced the best outcomes for people. And that then lended credibility to, well, maybe there's more to it. And, that's not a new thing. Back in the Willow Creek days, if you went to Willow Creek, they did a lot of preaching on wisdom. And the point of the preaching on wisdom was to build credibility that maybe this church and this Bible and this religion has something useful to offer to people. And if you build credibility, maybe they'll turn their life over to Christ and then get the ball rolling and become fully devoted followers of Christ. And so she's part of this whole movement of Utilitrads giving Christianity another look based on valuable social outcomes. Now, I've been reading through the book of Deuteronomy with our men's group, and we basically just read the book together and talk about what we read. And I warned them ahead of time that the book of Deuteronomy has a lot of repetition in it. Repetition of what's been in the other books up until then, and even repetition within itself. The book of Deuteronomy is just, really emphasizing points and getting them into your head, saying the same point many different times, many different ways, but it's always the same point. And you can find so many parts of the book of Deuteronomy which basically has this point. So if you faithfully obey the commands I'm giving you today, this is Moses talking to the people, to love the Lord your God and serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, then I will send rain on your land in its season, both autumn and spring rains, so that you may gather in your grain, your new wine, and your olive oil. I'll provide grass in the field for your cattle, and you will eat and be satisfied. Be careful, or you will be enticed to turn away and worship other gods and bow down to them. Then the Lord's anger will burn against you, and he will shut up the heavens so that it will not rain on the ground or yield no produce, and you will soon perish from the good land that the Lord is giving you. Now this message of obey and be blessed, disobey and be cursed, is repeated time and time and time again in the book of Deuteronomy. And it's not only in the book of Deuteronomy. In fact, when you get to the end, I often use these for sermons. You have whole chapters of covenant blessings and covenant curses, and the message is, if Israel obeys God, which right in Sinai, the Lord gives them the command, we will surely do all of these things. And then very quickly the disobedience and transgression commences, and it all gets really bad to the point of a whole generation dying in the desert because they balked at going into the land of promise. And God said, the children that you thought would be taken as slaves in the losing battles you would fight with these so-called giants, they will go into the land instead of you. Now, there's a lot of gospel of personal effort. And, a little while back when Jordan Peterson was on with Joe Rogan, that often seems to be one of the main points that Peterson comes to again and again. The Bible contains battle-sourced wisdom for us as individuals and groups to live better, more meaningful lives. And Jordan has been doing a lot of work in the Bible, and so he often tells Bible stories. And the story of Abraham that he tells again and again and again and again basically goes like this. Abraham was sort of a loser, a grown-up loser living in his father's basement. And then finally he strikes out for the promised land, this hero's journey, this adventurer's journey. And because he strikes out, God blesses him, and then he becomes the father of nations. And that's sort of the way it goes. And Jordan says it that way to inspire men who are living in their mother's basements to make your bed, get a job, marry your girlfriend if you've managed to get one, sort out your life, and you will have a better life. And all of that is true. That is very true. Sort out your life, and you will have a better life. And that's a wonderful message to tell people. But there's a long struggle within Christianity with respect to this. And as I go through the book of Deuteronomy with the men in the men's study, I keep reminding them that there are in some ways, there's sort of layers to this. I'm not saying that Deuteronomy isn't true. Obey God and you will be blessed. Disobey God and you'll be cursed. And people then bring in sort of a proxy called natural law. Obey natural law and you will be blessed. Disobey natural law and you will be cursed. It's very true. If you take good care of your body, chances are you will have health and live longer and so on and so forth. You might also get hit by a car. If you abuse your body and don't take care of yourself, then you'll probably have poor health and you won't feel good and you'll live less long and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or you might be one of those people that smoked 2 packs a day and lived into your 80s and never got cancer at all. And that's part of this. Now, you can take almost anything and put it into self-improvement language. But, I hear some Christian traditions sometimes sound like the degree that you work your program of divine self-improvement dictates the level of salvation you can achieve. Both anticipated salvation and realized salvation. Anticipated in the life to come and realized in this world. If, in fact, you believe in a life to come. The Jesus way is a way to new life only to the degree that you are able to perform it, to apply it, and to keep it. That level of obedience determines the level of outcomes that you will achieve. I hear these messages, and, well, there's some truth to them, just like God talks about reward in heaven for faithfulness and all of that. I'm not going to turn against that, but the karmic truth of Deuteronomy also has to contend with Job, who quite famously is set up at the beginning of the book to be the best man in the world. He was faithful to his family, he was faithful to his God, he was faithful to the poor. Job was blameless to the degree that when the accuser is roaming around the world looking for some way to sort of rain on God's parade, the Lord says, "Have you considered my servant Job?" And basically Satan says, well, this Deuteronomic system, once people figure it out, doesn't that undermine the whole basis of love and goodness, where all these people are just Pavlov's dog. You're ringing the bell and they're salivating, looking for their lunch. That's all that's happening. Job is blessed because you've blessed him. That's why he's good. Take away that goodness, he'll crumple. So God says, take it away. And it still doesn't get the results Satan wants. And so God says, okay, you can touch his health because few things make us more miserable than being sick, but you can't take his life. And then even Job's friends turn on him. And his wife says, curse God and die. And as Job and his friends say, well, Job, we've, I won't get into the Deuteronomy part as if they've read it, but the message is the same, and many religions have it. Do good things and you'll be blessed. Do bad things and you'll be cursed. So, well, Job, you've obviously suffered a tremendous calamity. You must have done something wrong. So why don't you just fess up now, do your confession, and be done with it? And Job won't have it. He won't listen to it. He says, no, I haven't done anything wrong. I don't know why God has turned against me, but, and I'd actually like God to, answer for this, which sounds terribly nerve-wracking, but Job does it, and Job isn't condemned for that. Now, sowing and reaping is true, but it's not the only truth on the table. And if you too tightly define this system of spiritual causes and outcomes, you cannot adequately account for the appearances we see. Of course, last week we talked about the garden. After the garden, humanity just keeps going downhill to the point that God looks around and says, I regret making these bloodthirsty people. And I'm going to start again. I'm going to hit the great reset button. So he looks around and finds the best man in the world. And he tells him to build an ark. And the animals come and they get on the ark. And God closes the door. And the waters fall. And God drowns the world and saves the best man and his children. Well, that's good, inheritance and all that. Genetics, evolution, all of those things that really have a lot of mental power in our day. And, all right, saves them. Starting over. But, it doesn't work. Pretty quickly, drunkenness, nakedness, and cursing follow. And then we wind up with the Tower of Babel. And you begin to wonder, well, just sort of rewarding good behavior and punishing bad behavior can't get us everywhere we want to go. So then God starts again with Abram. Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all the people of earth will be blessed through you. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all the possessions that he had accumulated and the people that they had acquired in Haran. He wasn't just living in his father's basement. He was a pretty successful businessman of some sorts, apparently. And they set out for Canaan. And they arrived there. So this isn't just a story of prosperity. He was prosperous before. And this isn't necessarily a story of competence. He was competent before. But there's one thing that he lacked, that he knew he lacked. And Calvinist preachers forever will make the point that, was Abram a good draft pick for God's fantasy football team? Doesn't appear so. If someone's going to be father of nations, you'd at least like him and his wife to be fertile. And at 75 and 65, anybody who knew any biology would say, that cake is baked, that ship has sailed, it ain't going to happen. Sorry. And then it's not just his inability to bring forth a child. It's his inability to believe the promise that he's been given. Pretty much the first story after this, Abraham goes to Egypt, is anxious about getting killed because even at 65, his wife is a hottie. So he says, well, let's agree that you're my sister. And she's his half-sister, so okay, and maybe. And then Pharaoh just gives him more stuff. But then the Lord comes to Pharaoh in a dream and says, don't you touch her. Because God has a point to make. And Abram still is not fully with the program. And so God blesses Abram and Lot with such great wealth that they can't be together because their servants are bickering. So they split. So right away you think, okay, karma confirmed. They're being blessed. All of Job's friends would look at them and say, look at the model citizens these are. And they go up on a mountain and Abram says, it's not good that we fight. Pick an area. Lot's no dummy. He looks around and says, "Oh, that the plain there looks really good. I'll just move into Sodom." Now, of course, didn't have the resonance it has now. Neighborhood looks good. Wealthy, prosperous people. I'll live in Sodom. You go out and live in more of that brown area to graze your sheep. Well, then Sodom gets attacked because everybody wants its stuff. And Sodom and their allies lose. And Lot is taken with the plunder. So Abraham's not going to let this happen to his nephew. So he's got a good number of trained men. And so he goes after these kings who won the war. And he beats them all by himself. And he wins Lot back. And again, divine favor confirmed. And Abraham tithes. But we're 3 chapters into this, and who knows how many years, and Abram is beginning to think, what was that happened? I've got questions. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." Notice it was after this. And so you begin to wonder if this God is sort of a, he sees what happens and then, I can jump on this train, an opportunist. So Abraham won, I guess, afterwards, as if it wasn't, in fact, God's choice and God's providence and God's will and what God had done that helped Abram win the fight and give him the trained men and all of that stuff. Abraham's grown wealthy. Abram's grown powerful. Abram has shown some growth in trust and devotion to God, but this comes after Abram wins. I have to watch the Abraham thing because there's the name change that comes. Some YouTube atheists might say, "Well, this is clearly a post hoc fallacy." God hasn't come through on the big thing, getting stuff, winning wars, but an old man and his old wife, old enough to receive Social Security, having a baby, that doesn't happen, okay? We all understand this. The ancients understood this. And Abram also understands that no matter how successful he becomes, if he doesn't have an heir, what then? Now, Abram's not slow, and, as someone regularly says to me, closed mouth doesn't get fed. "Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus? A slave, a servant, will inherit my estate." I mean, you can keep making me wealthy and powerful all day long, but if I don't have a son to give it to, it's empty. And Abram says, "You have given me no children." Ooh. Abram and Job and the Psalms, they know God isn't weak or fragile. "So a servant in my house will be my heir." Okay, Lord, this is where this is going, just so in case you're not paying attention at what you promised me. Then the word of the Lord came to him. "This man will not be your heir." Too bad for him. "But a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir." Abram pushes God, and God says, "Oh, we're gonna have some rough and tumble play here. You're complaining that I haven't come through? I'll double down. Your son will be your heir." So he took him outside and said, You want to watch me promise? Look at this. Look up at the sky and count the stars. Go ahead, try. Sacramento's not too hard. 1, 2, 3, 4. The ancient world. Go ahead and try and count those. See if you can keep them straight. They don't move. The people will move. If indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, "So shall your offspring be." Now, Abram's faith has probably grown a little bit. It's grown enough to sort of begin contending with this God. Can this God come through? Will this God come through? And then one of the strangest verses in the entirety of the Hebrew Bible. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited to him as righteousness. There's a dispositional change in Abram's heart, a little switch that goes off in his head. And whereas he came into that conversation ready to contend with God, perhaps something like the way Job wanted to contend with God, God says, I'll show you the stars. This is what I'm going to do for you. And instead of being skeptical because, well, Abram's, he's done the sacrifice thing. He left. He's following, and Abraham believes. And it's credited to him as righteousness. Now, normally righteousness is defined in terms of moral conduct. For example, in Ezekiel 18:5, if a man is righteous and does what is lawful and right, well, see, it's Deuteronomy. There then follows a list of actions prohibited in the Pentateuch, which a righteous man refrains from doing. God himself is frequently called righteous, Deuteronomy 32:4, Psalm 7:10. And righteousness might well be paraphrased as godlike, or even God-pleasing action. The sense of God-approved behavior is apparent in Genesis 18, Genesis 30, Genesis 38, on and on and on. No end to verses you can point to. But here, Abram is not described as doing righteousness. Rather, faith is being counted for righteousness. Normally, righteousness results in acquittal by the divine judge. Here, faith, the right response to God's revelation, counts instead. As the rest of the story makes plain, this faith leads to righteous action. But only here in the Old Testament is it counted as righteousness. God sees Abram's heart, and he sees trust. And God thinks, yeah, I'm not done with you. And apparently, you're not done with me. Now, it doesn't end the conversation. They go on, and they have a very dramatic ceremony that comes. And I was very tempted to preach on the whole thing because the ceremony is so good. And if you want to read about it, just read the rest of chapter 15. Abram starts talking about heirs and wants to talk about, land. And of course, if he doesn't have an heir, how can he possess it? But what the story of Abraham about is not God just simply rewarding someone who always does the right thing. Because if you follow the whole story, he continues to not do the right thing. That my wife is my sister trick, he will try that again. And so it's not the case simply that do good things, do things bad, good things happen, do bad things happen. God is building something in Abraham that he wants more than just outcomes, which seem to be the kinds of things that God can pretty easily accomplish in the world. And so even for someone like Louise Perry, it began with a teaser. You're a radical feminist, you're an activist, you're working in a rape counseling program, and you've got your eyes open and you're watching things, and you begin to say, this program I'm running, well, it's certainly a good program, we're certainly helping needy people, but the imagined transformation that people are saying will come isn't coming. But I'm looking over at that Christian thing, which everybody, all the cool kids say is just kind of old and doesn't work and is discarded. And I'm thinking, actually, I think it's a little better. There's wisdom here that can be seen in terms of outcomes. But we're going to have to develop a trust that goes beyond merely seeing outcomes. And that's true with statistics, because as anybody who works with groups of people know, that you might have a very good program, but it never works 100%. And in other words, you're going to have to go down a road, and that road is not going to be dependent on sort of, I have this little dog that I train, and As long as I have this little pouch of treats that I put on my belt when I'm with the dog. And very early on, I would joke with my wife and say, those are the keys to the dog. Because if I'm wearing that pouch, that dog knows it. When I tell that dog to do something, that dog does it. Because that dog knows once he does it, I say yes, and I give her a treat. The dog is happy. If I don't have that pouch on, I say things to the dog. The dog kind of looks at me like, are you going to fool me? Because every now and then I'll tell him to do something and the dog will do it and there's no treat. The dog's like, hey, I ain't working for free here. It seems that with faith, God is interested in developing something in us that goes beyond mere mercenary behavior, working for treats that come in short order after obedience. We're going to have to develop a trust that makes the connection between us and God not merely mercenary nor instrumental, but one of love. The book of Hebrews, which has sermons in it, looks back at all of these things and says, now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance for what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what is visible. By faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to a city with foundations whose architect and builder was God. And by faith even Sarah was past childbearing age and was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who made the promise. Of course, when you read Genesis kind of going forward, this is sort of looking back. But on the going forward part, there's a whole lot of wobbliness with Abraham and Sarah. You're going to have a son, and she laughs. But looking back, yeah, they wondered, they doubted. It was in the middle. We should all have a good amount of understanding for the challenges that they faced. So from this one man, as he was as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and as countless as the sands on the seashore. Promise was fulfilled. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They didn't get what they had promised. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had an opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Now, discipline, responsibility, effort, intelligence, skill can get you a long ways. It certainly can. And the message to clean your room, be faithful in your relationships, tell the truth, or at least don't lie, all of that is good advice. And if you take that advice, you will be blessed. I have no question about it. But even your capacity to do such things is a gift. It's a gift you can develop, but it's still a gift. And Deuteronomy is pretty clear on this too. At the heart of the Christian story is one innocent man crucified. A man who cleaned his room. A man who did what was right even when it was hard. And the reward he got for doing what was right was a cross. And when he hung on the cross, like Job's friends, people thought, certainly it wasn't something right with him, because God would never let something this bad happen to a good man. Not crucifixion. So we heap our sins on him, and he carries them for us. He is the sacrificial animal. He is the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. And invites us to trust him, even when we look around at the outcomes that we've received, maybe for even doing sacrificial good, and we say, this doesn't seem to work. Can this trust be credited as righteousness? It was for Abram. Until we reach the harbor, we are waiting on God's promises. We are not in a situation all that different from Abraham. Will the floods subside? Will the earth be renewed? Will we be called back from the grave? Will we reign with him in the new heavens and the new earth? How do we live like we really believe these things? Amen.